Hi there, my name is Piyush and I welcome you to the very first video of our Java series. Now, if you are an absolute beginner in Java, I would highly recommend you to watch this video till end. In this video, we are going to discuss about the architecture of the Java and how Java works. Now, this video is super important for you if you want to start your career as a Java developer. Now, before we dive into the Java, I want you to understand one problem using a real life example. Okay, so here let's assume that this is a person, right? So, this person, basically, this human being, knows only one language, like he is fluent in English language. Okay, he can speak English and he can understand English. Okay, on the other hand, let's say like there is one more human, okay, and this human being, this particular person can only speak French language. Okay, so if this person A, like let's name it A and let's name this person as B. Let's say this A person wants to communicate some message to this B person. So now the problem here is that there is a communication gap, right? Because this person, this particular A person cannot speak French and this B person cannot understand English, right? So there is no way of direct communicating. They cannot directly communicate. So what they need is to solve this problem, they'll introduce someone, some third person, like who can understand English and who can speak French, right? And what this person will do, he will actually listen to this A person's message and will translate it and then pass on to the B person, and similarly vice versa. So in our language, we call this person, we refer to this person as a translator, correct? So why am I discussing this problem here? Like what it has to do with Java? So when we talk about computer programs, codings, so this particular same problem occurs there as well. So we as a human, as a developer, we know like couple of languages, like we can communicate in English, we can communicate in Hindi and many other languages, right? But on the other hand, if I talk about a machine, basically a computer only understands one language, that is binary language. Okay. Now, the same problem occurs here as well. We humans don't know what is binary language and we cannot communicate in binary language, right? Similarly, computers don't understand English or Hindi language, they have their own binary language. And in binary, there are only two symbols, right? Either there is 0 and there is 1, right? But in English, like if I talk about English, like we have 26 letters, right? We have some symbols like dollar, hash, and we have like 10 numbers from 0 to 9. So like we have more symbols in our language compared to this binary language. That's why the language that a human beings understand and speak is known as high level language, because there are more symbols, whereas the binary language, which is 0 and 1, is considered to like is called to be low level language. Now how you as a developer can write code which is like understandable by the machine? So technically it is not possible, right? So what we do, we basically introduce someone like we did here, a translator, and in computer language we call it as compiler. So what we do, we basically choose a programming language, okay? For example, Java, which is a programming language, and we write a code in a human understandable format, okay? Like English like language. So we write a code in English like language. Now the problem with this source code is, as I already mentioned, that this source code is in English language, which is not understandable by the computers, right? Because they only understand binary. So what we do, we basically pass this code, whatever we write, to this compiler, okay? And the job of this compiler is to basically convert this human readable code to something known as binary code, or I can say machine understandable code. Now, when the machine responses back, obviously machine will also respond back in binary language, right? So this compiler is again responsible for converting this binary back to our high level language. Every language, any programming language, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Java, whether it's C or C++, every programming language has its own compiler which is responsible for converting high level language, which is our human readable language, to a low level language and vice versa. Now let's talk about Java specific architecture, how Java works. So if I talk about Java, basically what happens, like it is not that straightforward. Like it's not like there is a compiler, you give the code to it and it just compiles it. That is not the case in Java. Okay. So in Java, what happens? Basically, you are a developer, right? So what you do, you basically write down a code on a piece of file, right? So we in coding terms, we refer to this file as source code. Okay. So this is the source code, and this is written in English like language. Okay. So you as a developer wrote this source code, and what you do in Java, you give this source code to a Java compiler, right? As we discussed right now. Now what this Java compiler will do, basically this is the compiler, right? So you wrote this source code and you give it to compiler. So what this compiler will do, this will convert your source code to something known as bytecode. So this compiler took your source code and combined it into a bytecode. Now this bytecode is not directly understandable by the machine. This is not binary language. Okay, so this is bytecode, and computers still cannot read this bytecode directly. Now what you can do, you can basically publish this bytecode over the internet, right? So like for example, you made some cool app, maybe a calculator app. So you give this source code to the compiler made a bytecode. Now this bytecode is shareable basically. Okay, so what you did, you maybe uploaded it on the internet so that other users can use this. Now what, like, to run this bytecode, what happens, like for example, a human being, some other person downloaded this bytecode on his machine. Now he wants to run this bytecode, right? So what he needs to do is he needs to have something known as JVM, Java Virtual Machine, installed on his machine. Okay, so what he'll do, first of all, on his machine, JVM, or I can say like JRE, which has JVM built into it, so Java Runtime Environment, installed on his machine. And what he can do, he can basically pass on this bytecode onto this JRE, and JRE, basically Java Runtime Environment, will execute this code on his machine. So that's how on the basic level architecture of the Java works. So first of all, a source code is prepared and written by the developers. Then this source code is given to the compiler. Okay, compiler generates a bytecode which is not readable by the human, and you cannot edit it, and you can publish this bytecode. Okay, so and to run this bytecode, basically you need to have JRE, which stands for Java Runtime Environment, installed on your machine. Okay, and using this JRE, you can run this bytecode on your machine. So this was the architecture of Java. Now what's the benefit of this architecture is, number one that I would address is security, right? So basically your source code is always safe with you. You don't want to publish your source code on the internet, right? And if you do so, like, anyone can make a clone of your app very easily. So your source code is basically safe with you, and you only publish the bytecode which is not readable by the human to the internet. And secondly, one more benefit, that is cross platform. Okay, now this JRE thing, right, this JRE is basically available for all the operating systems out there, like Linux, Windows and Mac. So what you do, like, you wrote a source code once, and this bytecode can be executed, like can be run by the Linux users, can be run by the Windows as well as the Mac OS users. They just need to install JRE, right? Nothing else. So this makes Java a cross-platform language as well. So this was a very basic video on how Java works, what is a compiler, what is JRE, and what is JVM. Now one more component that I want to address here is known as JDK. So what JDK basically is, like, JDK stands for Java Development Kit. Okay, it has some tools which are useful for development in Java language built right into it. For example, JDK has this JRE and JVM and some CLI tools like pre-installed in this JDK, with which you can develop Java apps very easily on your machine. So in the next video, what we are going to do, basically we are going to install this JDK on our machine because we want to develop apps. But if you are a normal user, if someone is a normal user, not a developer, he just needs to have this JRE installed to run the apps. But for developing apps in Java, we need to install this JDK. So in the next video, I'll be guiding you how you can install and set up JDK on your machine.